Today I'm going to be sharing with you two different baking recipes, both over 100 years old. And this is something I like to do to keep myself entertained as a housewife, especially while we're in the busiest season on our farm. And I just need ways to keep engaged with my cooking. Both recipes in this video come from the 1915 copy of Five Roses Flour Cookbook. I'm starting out the night before because this recipe requires some advanced preparation for the potato yeast. I'm peeling and boiling 4 large potatoes and just enough water to cover, and then I'm using some regular active dry yeast with some of my sourdough starter because I haven't used my sourdough starter much throughout the summer, so it's not as powerful yet as it will be once I get it going. We need to get these potatoes mashed up in their cooking liquid, and in a separate bowl I'm adding 2 tablespoons of sugar, 2 tablespoons of salt, and 2 tablespoons of flour. And then we're going to blend that up and then pour that potato mixture over top. Over that, we need to add 2 cups of boiling water and then 8 cups of cold water. And I'm honestly unsure why we need so much liquid, but I'm following the recipe to a T. The cold water cools down the mixture immediately, so I'm able to add my yeast mixture right away and get that blended, and then we're just going to cover this, and this is supposed to sit for about 18 hours. And that's it for me for the night. I'm off to bed. The next day, I was getting pretty excited about this. It's so fun having a little project on the go. So I need 8 cups of flour. And to that, I need to add a tablespoon of salt, a tablespoon of brown sugar, and a tablespoon of butter. And in the recipe, it states to warm this over the stovetop. But I'm going to put this in my dehydrator and get it warming up that way, just because I don't want to play around with flour on the stove. And I fed my starter last night. This is what it's looking like. It's looking very active. And because I have an older starter here that's probably 4 or 5 years old now, it's coming back to life pretty quickly. But more importantly, I was really interested to see how the potato yeast mixture was doing. And it had such a pungent smell, it burnt my nose. So it was quite fermented at this point. And this is exactly what we wanted. So we need 4 cups of this mixture. And then we're going to be mixing it with 4 cups of the flour mixture and making sort of a sponge. And that's kind of like a wet, doughy mixture that you're getting active before you add and knead in the rest of the flour. So I'm adding half of that flour and getting that going, and then I'm going to be heading outside and working on our farm while this does its thing. I also got a nice pot of soup going in my crock pot, so this bread ended up being the perfect accompaniment to our dinner. It was so perfect. So this is already a couple of hours later, and my sponge has risen, and now it's time to get adding the rest of the flour and working it in to create a nice dough. One of the things that was mentioned in the cookbook was to not over add flour because it's going to make a tougher bread. And so even though this dough was a little bit on the stickier side, I just trusted the process. So now this is a little bit later again, and that dough has risen. And now I'm going to be kneading it and dividing it into loaves. I'm buttering up my hands and my mat just so that this dough doesn't stick so much without having to add any extra flour. Another suggestion about bread making in this cookbook was for all of your ingredients to be either room temperature or even slightly warmed up. And that's just going to help everything work quicker and better. Of course, that takes a lot of extra foresight and planning and time, things that us modern housewives don't necessarily have the time for. But luckily for me, because I do work from home, I do have the ability to take all of these extra steps throughout my day and check up on things when needed. I greased my pans very thoroughly with butter, and now I'm just shaping these into a loaf, and then I'm going to let these rise again for probably about another hour. This was a weeding day for me, so I'm weeding out on our farm, and I've set timers so that I know when I need to come back inside. And my loaves are perfectly risen, but there have been instances in the past where I lost track of time and things were over risen and I had to punch them down and start again. So that's why I set a timer now. And I'm popping these into a preheated oven at 350 degrees. And I'm putting them in for 45 minutes. And here I am after that 45 minutes, my timer went off and I'm just getting exhausted with the heat because it's a really hot day outside. So I'm coming in to take these out, and you want to take them out of the pans immediately as soon as you take them out of the oven and start letting them cool off. And if you don't take them out of the pans, what's going to happen is that they're going to steam inside of the pans and get kind of wet. So you don't want that. You want the steam to be able to be released freely. So I'm putting these onto a rack so that they can have air circulation around all sides. And because I'm using this bread tonight for our dinner, I'm going to put some butter on top so that I have a soft crust. After all this preparation and work, here is the moment of truth. I'm going to cut into this bread, and I'm just so curious about the flavor and the taste. And the first thing that I noticed was how soft and flexible this bread was. It was incredible, and it's the softest bread I have ever made, ever. So that was really impressive to me. And then I really was hoping for a really strong potato taste, but I have to be 100% honest with you. I didn't get that. It just tasted like a regular white bread. I didn't taste any potato. However, the texture of this bread was the most impressive thing. And I couldn't get over how squishy and flexible this bread was. And my son told me that this was the best bread I ever made. So I think this would be a really good sandwich bread and just all around a really delicious loaf. The second bread I decided to make for this video was steamed brown bread, which is a Boston brown bread. And I have never had this before. I've never made this before, so I was pretty intrigued. So the first thing I did was grind up some whole wheat flour. The recipe called for graham flour, which I see a lot in these older recipes. And when I looked it up, it's just a coarser grind of whole wheat flour, which I can do with my wheat grinder. And then I'm getting these vessels thoroughly greased up. I have a tin can, and then I also have my sort of glass coffee vessel, I guess you would call it. And I just made use of what I had. So I need 2 cups of this whole wheat flour to 1 cup of all-purpose flour. I also need a teaspoon of baking soda dissolved in a little bit of hot water, and then we're going to be adding this to the buttermilk. And this was suggested in the recipe, and I've never done anything like this before, but the buttermilk actually did foam up. We're also going to be adding a half a teaspoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, and then a tablespoon of molasses. I did kind of a heaping tablespoon of molasses because I figure that's one of the most important flavors. So I decided to do that. And then unfortunately, I lost footage here of me adding the buttermilk to that and stirring it. And I was so disappointed about that. I'm so sorry. So I have to mix that buttermilk mixture into this flour mixture and then put it into my buttered up vessels. So I lost that footage, but that's what I did. And then so we're skipping right over to that mixture being in my vessels, and you will only want them to be about halfway up because they're going to rise. So I've got those in there, and then I'm going to be covering these with buttered tin foil. And then, of course, I checked first to make sure that these were actually going to fit in my slow cooker. And you could probably do this on the stove top, maybe even in the oven. I'm not sure. I don't know how they would have done it back then. And quite honestly, they leave a lot of information out of these recipes because they assume everyone knows exactly what to do. And so they just tell you to steam it, and that's it. So I put these into my slow cooker, and then I put about 2 inches of water up, and because a slow cooker doesn't really lose a lot of moisture throughout cooking, I knew that that would be enough to keep it steamed. The recipe says to steam this for 2.5 hours and then put it in a moderate oven for 15 minutes. What I did was I put my slow cooker on high for that 2.5 hours and then turned it down to low for the rest of the day while I finished my work. So I was out picking flowers and making salad mix and doing different things on this day. And this is my husband and I having our little lunch break together. And so the whole day passed while that was steaming, and I didn't put it in the oven for 15 minutes. I just decided to keep it on low because on these older slow cookers, the low setting is almost like a keep warm setting. They don't produce as much heat as the modern slow cookers do on a low setting. And so this is after being in there for probably about 6 hours. And I also made baked beans to go with this meal because that's the classic combination. And so I have a crock pot full of steaming hot baked beans. And I was so excited about this bread. I've never made this before, so this was totally new to me. And I thought they would just come sliding out, but they didn't. I had to get in there with the knife and kind of scrape out the sides so that it would come loose. I do have a collection of old cookbooks. And so this is something that is just so fun for me and really keeps me interested in cooking after 25 plus years of being a housewife. You really need something to keep you going after that long. And just making the same things all the time just gets so boring. And so one of the things I do for fun is I pull out these old cookbooks and I like to try out recipes from time to time. So I finally got that bread out of that can, and it came out really nicely once I was able to slide the knife in and kind of dislodge it. Boston brown bread is always something that I have heard of. I've heard of it so many times, but I've never, ever had it or tried it. And boy, oh boy, was I ever in for a treat with this bread. I am telling you, if you've never tried this before, please do try this recipe because you will be absolutely delighted. It was absolutely delicious because it has that kind of steamed pudding texture. It's like biting into it. It's soft. It's not chewy. It's so hard to describe. The flavor of this bread is savory and sweet at the same time. And it's just so hearty and so delicious that I would just eat the bread. Like, it was just so good. And I probably had 4 slices of it with this meal because it was so, so good. So I'm really excited for you to see me try this bread because my reaction, I just could not believe how good this bread was. If you get anything out of this video at all, I hope it's that you're going to try this bread. Because I'm definitely going to make it again and again and again. I'm going to save my tin cans for this recipe. I hope you enjoyed spending some time baking with me today. Thank you so much for joining me in today's video. If you liked this video and you're new to my channel, hit that subscribe button. I share videos every week on homemaking, food from scratch, and life on our farm.